What can you expect for this new moon in Scorpio that is happening today, Friday, November 1st, 2024? Well, let me say this is bringing up new beginnings, as all new moons do. And we're looking at new beginnings having to do with all things Scorpio, which could bring up themes of secrets, power dynamics, intimacy, sex, really private areas of life, maybe the subconscious things that have been deeply buried within you. So let's talk about how this is going to impact your relationships, your resources, and so much more. The tricky thing with this energy is that although it is a new moon marking new beginnings, it's also Scorpio, which has to do with the past, things that are buried, and this kind of death rebirth cycle of revitalizing something or dealing with unresolved issues from the past. So although we want to say this is a new beginning, it is also about an ending, or perhaps in some way, in order to get this new beginning, you're going to have to end something. So there's a duality here if you pick up what I'm laying down. And we're likely to see transformation of these themes occurring over the next 2 to 4 weeks, but really over the next 6 months when we finally hit that full moon in Scorpio in spring of 2024, and this comes to complete culmination. On the relationship front, let's first talk about your relationship with yourself, right? We all have to start at that ground zero starting point. This could be an energy where we do a lot of shadow work. We potentially could, and it could start with something very basic as what are my needs? What are my desires? That might not be so easy. It might be something, if you're being brutally honest with yourself, that you've been shamed, that you've hidden, that you have suppressed because people have maybe drilled it into your head, or society has conditioned you that, why do you want that? You shouldn't want that. Or, maybe you should go do that, get that from, yourself and not expect that from other people. But at the end of the day, if you're being really honest, this is what you are desiring in your relationships. And for some of you, you may find over the next 2 to 4 weeks, you're feeling an increased desire for greater depth and vulnerability and intimacy in your relationships. And you're probably noticing this with others. The challenge here is, do people have the emotional depth and maturity to really dig deep into their relationships? Are they really at a place where they have the emotional maturity to be flexible and face some fears, look at their shadow, look at their dark side, maybe integrate shadow aspects of themselves? When it comes to resources, I think that this is a time where we could set some intentions about how we're going to make use of our money, our resources, and that of others. Because Scorpio is a lot about other people's money and resources. And yet in that, we've got to face down the reality of vulnerabilities that we all have when we join forces with people financially, issues of abuse and misuse of power, issues of exploitation. And I definitely think over the next 6 months, we're going to see more of a conversation about this, particularly with the collective, and looking at how resources have been used in groups, in communities, and maybe not for the greater good. And consider joining forces with other people, because people power is what's going to get us through with Pluto moving into Aquarius and for the next 20 years, starting the second half of this month on the 19th. In terms of humanity, we're looking at the next 2 to 4 weeks. There could be some exposés come out, some investigations, some disclosures, and definitely, like I said, this will totally culminate by next spring 2025 when we have the full moon in Scorpio to complete this cycle. So these disclosures and exposés and whatnot may have to do with the natural disasters I've been talking about, and they might also have to do with sex scandals that we have been hearing about, and they may also have to do with issues concerning mortality and death rates that, unfortunately, it's a fact of life. That's what comes up with Scorpio. So I'm going to give you a word of caution here that we are going to see some things that maybe we don't want to see and that we don't want to know. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to unsee it. You're not going to be able to unknow it, And there are going to be a lot of people who are trying to hide. But given the collective energy that this new moon is happening within, we are at a unique point in history where you cannot run from the truth anymore. The time for, Neptuning out, escapism is running out. And this is probably going to be the hardest for people who don't want to know, don't want to see. And unfortunately, they can't unsee. And let's say that there is some spiritual immaturity or inflexibility and they are refusing to adapt to new information coming in. These are the people who are going to have the hardest time in the year ahead, definitely 6 months ahead with everything coming out. These are issues that have been buried that people want to keep buried. Things that have been in the dark that people don't want a spotlight shown on. They don't want to deal with uncomfortable truths, but you're not going to be able to get around it with this energy. It's going to bring up issues having to do with jealousy, envy, power tripping, controlling, possessive type of energy. So do beware of that. It's going to bring out the shadow side of humanity, the darker side of humanity that we want to make believe that everybody means well, but the reality is that some people don't. And the lengths that they're willing to go, the depths of depravity that they're willing to resort to is something that most people can't wrap their heads around. And if you don't have the emotional capacity to integrate that shadow side of life, you're going to have a very hard time because we're just running out of ways to hide and evade what's coming. So do be aware of people who are not going to cope well with this. They're going to get frustrated. They're going to be hostile. They don't have the capacity to deal with reality. Some advice for positive impact with this energy, how we can use it for the highest good. Well, in relationships, I would say don't run from shadow energy. Don't try to not see it, because the more you run from it, the more it pursues you. And the best thing to do is to put a spotlight on these issues. If you're dealing with lack of support or loss of support in your relationships, this is the time to address it. There may be issues in your past where people could not or would not show up for you. And you might have tried to address it in the past. It might be an issue that is stuck, it's left unresolved, and here you are back again at this issue where you've got to find some way of accepting something that maybe you don't like, because who knows, maybe you try to work it out and this person didn't apologize. They didn't see anything wrong with the exchange. Maybe they think you're wrong. They're right. Whatever. You're at an impasse. You're at a crossroad, leaving you stuck with an unresolved issue of you have some unmet need or desire in a relationship and there's no resolution. And so this could be a time where if you can't get a reworking of this in the relationship, if you can't breathe new life into this relationship at this point, you may have to find some way to find renewal within yourself, find another way to go about getting that need met apart from those people. Ideas on resources, obviously, like I said, get a stash of cash going just for emergencies and make sure that you have backup plans, particularly if you are in an area that could be impacted by hurricanes, floods. Make sure you have another location set up, an emergency evacuation plan for yourself and your family so that if you need to get out, then you're set up, maybe, bugging in, bugging out, whatever it is you need to do to prep and prepare for the possibility of something like that happening over the next 6 months would be a good time to prepare, like starting now, definitely. But I could see this being needed over the next year and a half or so. And also consider people power, consider forming, joining, supporting co-ops, because that's where we're going to have our power, is co-ops, not with FEMA, not with insurance companies, not with the government. It's going to be people power like we're seeing out in North Carolina. And that ties me to ideas about humanity. We can positively impact humanity by stepping more into our own personal power and joining forces with people who are in that mindset as well. Rather than sitting down talking about what you can't do, let's sit down and come together and talk about what we can do. This is not going to be a time for delegating personal power and responsibility to the authorities, as we have seen, in the past. That's what needs to get released so that we can have this new beginning. Healing ideas for this new moon in Scorpio. Obviously, I'm going to say, detox, obviously, right? Doing some kind of cleanse, trying to cleanse any toxic habits or food that you're ingesting, substances from your environment, trying to clean that up. Shadow work, also really powerful. Side note, I do healing readings where I get into doing shadow work. It's one of my premium readings. And so if you are interested in that, comment down below or reach out to me, because when we're talking about Scorpio, we're looking at the occult, we're looking at the hidden knowledge. Figure out your attachment style and start working through some of that. And in a more practical, down-to-earth sense, you could clean your house, right? Disinfect things, sage it, purify it, bring out the Palo Santo. Remember, if you want to find me elsewhere for more content or a private reading, I am on X, I am on YouTube, and my private readings are over on Etsy. Hope to connect with you again soon.